The United Nations General Assembly is the world's biggest stage for diplomacy. Every September, leaders from nearly every country on Earth gather in New York to debate, to solve problems, and sometimes to clash in front of a global audience. It is supposed to be a place of dialogue, peace, and cooperation, but over the years, it has also become the site of some of the most dramatic political moments in modern history. These speeches and actions are remembered not because they solved problems, but because they shocked the world, provoked controversy, and, in some cases, became iconic symbols of the times. Today, we look back at 6 unforgettable moments at the UN General Assembly that have left a permanent mark on history. In September 2009, the world witnessed the unpredictable spectacle of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi giving his first-ever speech at the United Nations. Delegates expected a routine address, but what they got instead was one of the most chaotic and fiery speeches the General Assembly had ever seen. Gaddafi was allotted just 15 minutes, but he spoke for an incredible 100 minutes, unleashing a torrent of anger at the global order. He accused the Security Council of being a tool of powerful nations like the United States, Russia, and China, calling it unfair and outdated. In a shocking act of defiance, he physically tore up a copy of the UN Charter while speaking, symbolizing his disdain for what he saw as a broken international system. Gaddafi's speech jumped wildly from topic to topic. At one point, he suggested that the swine flu pandemic had been deliberately engineered as a biological weapon by pharmaceutical companies to profit from selling vaccines. He raged against NATO, against Western imperialism, and even demanded that the United States pay reparations to Africa for centuries of colonization and exploitation. Delegates sat stunned, some laughing nervously, others visibly annoyed, while several simply walked out of the room in protest. What was supposed to be a statesman's debut turned into a bizarre rant that cemented Gaddafi's reputation as one of the most eccentric and unpredictable figures on the world stage. His 2009 speech became a symbol of how volatile the UN floor could become when leaders decided to abandon diplomacy in favor of drama. 3 years earlier, in 2006, another fiery leader, Venezuelan President Hugo Chávez, created one of the most memorable and quoted moments in UN history. The day before, U.S. President George W. Bush had addressed the General Assembly, defending American foreign policy and the war on terror. Chávez, a vocal critic of U.S. influence in Latin America, saw this as the perfect opportunity to make a statement. As he approached the podium, he crossed himself dramatically, looked around the room, and said with a mix of humor and venom, "The devil came here yesterday. Right here. And it still smells of sulfur." The room erupted with laughter, applause, and shocked gasps. Chávez wasn't done. He launched into a passionate speech, calling Bush a liar, a warmonger, and a threat to humanity. He accused the U.S. of trying to dominate the world and destroy weaker nations in the name of freedom. While many delegates laughed at Chávez's theatrics, the remark sparked a serious diplomatic incident. U.S. officials condemned his words, calling them disgraceful and inappropriate for an international forum. But for Chávez, who thrived on political theater, the speech was a victory. It turned him into a hero among anti-imperialist movements worldwide and gave him a moment of global fame. To this day, the phrase, "the devil came here yesterday," remains one of the most famous insults ever delivered in the halls of the United Nations. Fast forward to 2017, when U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the General Assembly for the first time amid escalating tensions with North Korea. Kim Jong-un's regime had been conducting a series of nuclear tests and missile launches, prompting widespread concern about a possible war. The world was watching closely to see how Trump would handle the crisis on a stage that demanded diplomacy. Instead, Trump delivered one of the most aggressive speeches ever given by an American leader at the UN. In a moment that shocked the room into silence, he openly mocked Kim Jong-un, calling him "Rocket Man on a suicide mission." Then he issued a chilling warning: "The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully, this will not be necessary. However, if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea." The threat was unprecedented. Many world leaders sat frozen, exchanging uneasy glances as they processed the idea of a US president publicly threatening to wipe out an entire nation. The speech drew immediate criticism from allies and adversaries alike, with many arguing that Trump's words risked escalating the conflict even further. North Korea quickly fired back, calling Trump a mentally deranged dotard. The moment underscored just how fragile and dangerous diplomacy can be when nuclear powers clash, and it remains one of the most dramatic episodes in the modern history of the General Assembly. But sometimes, what captures the world's attention at the UN isn't just words, it's imagery. In 2012, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a speech aimed at convincing the world to take a harder stance against Iran's nuclear program. As he spoke, he unveiled a large visual aid, a cartoon-style drawing of a bomb. It looked almost like something out of a comic book, but Netanyahu was dead serious. Using a red marker, he drew a line on the diagram to show the point at which, he claimed, Iran would be dangerously close to developing a nuclear weapon. He warned that unless action was taken, the world would face catastrophic consequences. The unusual prop was mocked by some observers, who felt it trivialized a serious issue, but it was also incredibly effective. The image of Netanyahu holding the bomb chart was splashed across newspapers and social media worldwide, turning his warning into a viral moment. Whether people agreed with him or not, they couldn't forget the visual. It became a defining symbol of Netanyahu's approach to foreign policy, blunt, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. While most UN speeches focus on immediate political crises, in 2019, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson took a different approach. In a speech that was both humorous and haunting, Johnson warned about the dangers of artificial intelligence and unchecked technological advancement. His address sounded at times like something out of a dystopian novel. He spoke about pink-eyed terminators, terrifying limbless chickens, and a future where algorithms could control our decisions, from who gets hired to who goes to prison. Beneath the colorful language, Johnson raised serious ethical questions about privacy, surveillance, and the role of technology in society. He warned that without proper regulation, humanity could lose control over its own creations. Some delegates laughed at his eccentric delivery, but others saw his message as a vital call to action. As AI continues to shape our world, Johnson's speech stands as an early attempt to make world leaders think seriously about the consequences of the technologies they are so eager to embrace. Finally, we turn back the clock to 1960, during the height of the Cold War, when Cuban revolutionary leader Fidel Castro made his mark on UN history with a speech that broke all records for length. Castro, who had recently seized power in Cuba after overthrowing the Batista regime, arrived at the UN ready to challenge the dominance of the United States and its allies. His speech lasted an astonishing 4 hours and 29 minutes, the longest ever given at the General Assembly. During those hours, Castro railed against US imperialism, defended socialism, and accused Western nations of exploiting the developing world for their own gain. He passionately described the struggles of the Cuban people and positioned himself as a champion of oppressed nations everywhere. While some delegates were enthralled by his energy and charisma, others were exhausted and even irritated by the sheer length of the address. By the time Castro finally stepped away from the podium, he had ensured that Cuba's voice would be heard on the global stage, and he had cemented his reputation as one of the most fiery orators of the 20th century. From fiery insults to nuclear warnings, from bizarre props to marathon speeches, the United Nations General Assembly has seen moments that changed the course of history, and moments that simply left the world speechless. These events remind us that words have power, to inspire, to provoke, and sometimes, to terrify. They also reveal the human side of global politics, where leaders are not just diplomats but also performers, using the world stage to send messages to their people, their enemies, and the future. Which of these moments do you think was the most unforgettable? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from history and politics.